Hi and welcome back. Welcome to Lois and Morgana Davidson Art. It's Lois here, and today I'm going to be painting this misty lake scene with reeds, and I'm going to be focusing on trying to get the reflections right. This is the photograph that I'm using as inspiration from Pixabay, and I shall leave the link in the description below. I'm using Millford cold pressed watercolour paper. It's 100% cotton and it's taped to my board with ordinary decorator's masking tape. My board's at an angle of about 45 degrees and I'm going to paint wet in wet. So I'm going to wet my page all over. I'm using a 1.5 inch synthetic Princeton Aqua Elite Mottler brush, but any large wash brush will do. This is a mixture of indigo with a little bit of lavender added to it, plenty of water to give me this really nice misty pale sky. And I'm just going to paint it onto the page, wet in wet, with horizontal brush strokes and try and create a sort of graduated wash all the way down the page. So I'm going to go through the sky, the distant tree line, and then across the water using this same mix of paint. You can see the paint diffusing down the page. If I keep just occasionally flattening it out a little bit with another brush stroke, I can get this nice slightly graduated wash. I don't mind that I've missed out a bit on the right side. That might help me to get some sort of harder edged reeds in when I put those in a bit later. So I've added some more indigo to my sky wash mixture, but not added any more water. And I'm dropping in my distant tree line. Hopefully this will just diffuse and really blend back into the background. I don't want it to show too much, as I'm looking for that nice misty sense of aerial perspective and with it sort of disappearing into the background. I've added now some raw umber, a little bit of burnt umber to my indigo mix, and I'm putting in on the right just the suggestions of my darker tree, and then a little bit of this darker colour across the distant tree line just to define it a little bit more as it continues to soften and diffuse. I'm going to take some burnt umber now and drop some darker patches into this midground tree. The midground tree is going to sort of be the focus, but will lead the eye to the reeds and the reflections. And I've decided to warm up the distant tree line a bit. Now I've got colours in this tree, I think my distant tree line just needs a little bit of raw umber added to it quickly before it dries too much. And this should just all soften and diffuse and just give me that little bit of warmth as the trees sort of appear out of the mist. Now a clean damp flat brush, and just going to lift out a waterline. There isn't one in the photograph, but I'm going to use my artistic license, and I just think it gives that little nice bit of definition and just makes the water sort of stand out and sparkle just a little bit more. Again, the clean damp flat brush and lifting out another sort of water line a little bit further in, again to give me that little bit of freshness and sparkle. Setting the scene for the reeds. The paper is still damp, so if I work quickly I can just drop in a base for my reeds and have them soften and diffuse into the wash. This is raw sienna, a bit of burnt sienna, some burnt umber, and then just using the tips of the mottler brush or flat brush to drop in these sort of reed shapes that will soften and diffuse. I'm sort of making them slightly shorter and further apart the further I go into the painting, keeping them nice and dense and varying up the hue by adding in a little bit more raw umber or maybe a little bit more burnt sienna just to brighten them up and deepen them in places. And then below the reeds. I'm going to sort of more or less copy that, keeping it nice and vertical below to create my reflection. So I'm roughly mirroring the reeds in the reflection and then dropping in some darks into the reeds and their reflections. These should just soften back and lighten up as they dry. And then taking my clean, damp flat brush, I can reinforce that waterline in places. And then go back over that with a few more reeds. So the horizontal water lines and the vertical reeds, so that I've got a balance of light showing through the reeds that helps to sort of add a bit of life to that area. And now, just before I leave things to dry, I'm going to use the corner of a plastic card and I'm going to scratch some lighter branches, etching through the paint to reveal the white paper underneath. And then later on, when I come in and put the darks into that tree, I shall negatively paint around some of those marks, so I've got some nice pale branches that will stand out really nicely above that darker, thicker patch of reeds. And then just wiping across the tape at the bottom of the painting to make sure that there's no paint that could sort of run back into the painting as I leave it to dry. And then I'm just going to use the modeler brush just to soften the transitions between the reeds and the reflections a little bit. And then taking the corner of the card, or you could use a palette knife, your fingernail, or the end of a paintbrush, just pulling out a few lighter reeds, etching between the reeds to reveal the white of the paper. This also will move the paint around a little bit and just give me some spontaneous marks that will work well amongst the softly diffusing brushwork, and then making sure that I go back in and do that in the reflection as well. It's nearly dry, so anything I do now has got to be done just with a damp brush that's almost dry. Any water that gets introduced to the page at this point will create nasty runbacks. So this is only just damp, and I'm reinforcing my water lines just to go back to the white of the paper to give me that sort of shine of light on the water. And then I can feather the damp brush through the paint in the foreground horizontally, and this will just give me a faint impression of a little bit of movement across the surface of the water in the foreground. And then with the damp brush, just a last bit of blending and softening of this base layer for the reeds. And then I need to leave it to dry completely, and then I can come back and finish the painting once it's all completely dry. So it's completely dry, and what I'm going to do is, using a Da Vinci Spin size 1 round brush, synthetic, I'm going to use my darker mix of indigo with a bit of burnt sienna and burnt umber, and I'm just going to negatively paint around some of the marks that I made when I etched with the card into the wet paint earlier, and darken up these trees. Negatively painting around some of the shapes and leaving the underpainting showing through, as well as the etched marks, will give me a nice natural looking little stand of trees in the midground behind the foreground reeds. I can soften back by cleaning the brush and getting all the water out of it and just softening back on some of the edges to make sure it's not too hard. And I can do that, I can soften as they meet the top of the reeds as well. And if this isn't dark enough, I can go back in darker a little bit later. We'll see how it dries. And now I'm working on the edge, trying to make it a little bit more ragged. Just a bit more of this nice dark paint with rich burnt umber. Hope you can see how this tree now is just beginning to get some sort of form and shape, a bit more definition. It's starting to become more of a focal point. So I'm taking my sword liner. It's a Pro Art size small sword liner. It holds a lot of paint, and I've mixed up raw sienna, burnt sienna and some raw umber, and I'm going to put in some stronger reed shapes with vertical brush strokes, pulling them up from the water level. You can see how they are looking more defined than the wash that went on first. So this gives me the illusion of detail of these reeds. The sword liner holds a lot of paint, so you can keep going for a while. It's really useful for painting reeds. I learnt this technique from Morgana. Her reeds are really beautiful. And then just dotting here and there, just to give the illusion of some of the sort of reed flowers or seed heads at the top of the reeds. Just a few here and there. And then bringing down, of course, that sort of reflection. But this time, now that I'm painting with wet paint onto a dry painting, for the reflections, I'm going to make the lines come down and then wiggle them a bit from side to side. So it sort of looks as if they are the reflection is slightly being broken up by the small amount of movement in the water. So it's just a bit of a balancing act, trying to make sure that I build up the reeds enough without overdoing it, and then sort of match that in the reflections, and then create that sort of that wiggly line down towards the tape. If anything's too dark, I can just use a paper towel to blot out a little bit of the paint, and that keeps that sort of misty look. I want some definition, but not too much. Back again with this slight dotting motion of the tips of the sword liner brush. Just some fine, slightly more defined reeds standing by themselves further into the painting. And now to put in some shadows between the reeds and to really thicken up the reeds at this point here as they meet the bank. Again, mirrored below in the reflection. So I'm just painting between some of the reeds that I've already painted, wherever I think it needs just a little bit of darker shadow. If I need to soften anything back, I can just smudge with my finger. So I think we're nearly done now. It's just a few finishing touches. I'm going to put in a few slightly more prominent fine branches around the edges of the canopy, pulling them through over the painted areas, just bringing out a few fine twigs here and there. Then just a few more into the actual canopy itself. So we've got a nice tangle of branches. And now just for a finishing touch, I'm going to use the small calligraphy brush just to sort of make the edge a bit more ragged with just a few sort of loose dead leaves. Small twigs that you can just about see. Just little bits sticking out here and there, and again this tiny amount of detail draws the eye and helps to lead the eye into the painting, across the reeds, through the water and along the tree line, the misty tree line at the back. Maybe just darken up a few more of the reeds across the centre so that they actually show up quite nicely against the background. And that's just push the background back a little bit further, which is nice. And that's the painting finished. I'm going to remove the tape and see how it looks with a clean white border. I like to look at it with the clean white border. It helps me to see it almost as if it was in a frame. It somehow looks more complete, and that helps you to sort of see whether or not it needs anything doing to it. Now I think this would be beautiful with some sort of wetland birds in it, but I'm not going to paint them today. I'm going to keep it very still and very calm. But Morgana's got a lot of tutorials here where she shows you how to paint particularly geese, which really suit the wetland. So take a look at those if you want to add some birds to your painting if you decide to have a go at this. So looking closely, I really like the way that the reeds stand out against the background with just that little bit of detail. So I hope you found that helpful. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. And if you want to see more videos from us, then click on the bell and you'll get notifications whenever we post. So thanks so much for watching, and thank you so much to everyone that supports us on Patreon. So I'll see you again soon, and happy painting. Bye.